I never thought I would watch my daughter-in-law Brenda casually toss my grandmother's paprika tin into a garbage bag while explaining how organic seasonings were better for the family's health. At 65, I stood in my own kitchen watching strangers rearrange my life in the house I had helped save from foreclosure 2 years earlier, when $50,000 of my retirement savings kept the bank from taking their home. That morning had started like any other Wednesday. I had prepared breakfast for Jessica and Mark's twin boys, Leo and Liam, who always asked for my special pancakes with blueberry smiley faces. The 6-year-olds were bright spots in an increasingly uncomfortable situation, though even they seemed quieter lately, sensing the tension that had settled over the house. Jessica had been different since her father died 3 years ago. Where once she had been independent and decisive, she now deferred to Mark's opinion on everything, even matters concerning her own mother. I had moved in after Robert's passing, not because I couldn't manage alone, but because Jessica insisted she needed help with the twins. I sold my comfortable condo, contributed to household expenses, and threw myself into being the helpful mother and grandmother I thought they needed. Changes happened gradually. Mark suggested I move to the smaller guest room for their home office. Then came comments about my cooking being too heavy, television too loud, friends calling too often. I told myself these were reasonable requests from stressed people. What I hadn't expected was the announcement that Mark's parents, Gary and Brenda, would move in permanently. The news came during what I hoped would be a pleasant family dinner. I had prepared Mark's favorite honey-glazed chicken, and the dining room felt warm with soft lighting and family photos, including Robert and me on our wedding day. Mark stood with his wine glass, using corporate language about optimizing living space and multi-generational households. When he announced his parents would take my room because Gary's back required ground floor accommodation, something cold settled in my chest. Jessica wouldn't meet my eyes as she mumbled about finding a nice apartment where I could enjoy privacy and quiet. When I reminded them that my $50,000 had saved their home from foreclosure, Brenda leaned forward with her patronizing smile, telling me that dwelling on the past wasn't healthy. The next weeks brought increasingly uncomfortable encounters. Gary and Brenda began moving belongings in early. I watched helplessly as my space was colonized by people who viewed my presence as temporary and inconvenient. Brenda replaced my spices with expensive organic alternatives, complaining about unhealthy smells whenever I cooked. Gary upgraded internet and cable for premium sports channels, making the bills everyone's responsibility. The day I found them measuring my bedroom for a future hospital bed, I realized this wasn't about accommodation. This was about erasure. The family portrait above the fireplace, including Robert and me, disappeared, replaced by Gary and Brenda's anniversary photo. But it was the rocking chair that broke something fundamental inside me. Robert had given it to me for our 30th anniversary, solid oak he had spent months refinishing. It was where I had rocked the twins to sleep, read bedtime stories, found comfort after Robert's funeral. Finding it in the garage with Mark's handwritten sign, "Free to good home, must go ASAP," was when I understood this wasn't about living arrangements. This was about power, and I had allowed mine to be taken away piece by piece. I sat in that garage running my hands over the smooth oak armrests Robert had sanded with such care. Around me were boxes of my belongings, quietly relocated from the main house, my life being systematically packed away, as if I were already gone. That evening, I drove to the park where Robert and I used to walk and called my friend Donna. When I told her about the chair, the measuring tape, the casual cruelty of being erased, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that changed everything. This wasn't family dysfunction. This was elder abuse disguised as family planning. And I had legal rights as someone who had made substantial financial contributions. More importantly, she reminded me of something I had forgotten. I was not a burden to be managed. I was a capable woman who had raised a daughter, built a career, and supported a family. That night, I sat at my laptop and began to do what I did best. I organized information. For 30 years, I had been a bookkeeper, and those skills were exactly what I needed now. I printed bank statements, gathered receipts, photographed serial numbers. I opened a new spreadsheet and began itemizing every major purchase I had made for the household. The list was staggering. The refrigerator with the ice maker the twins loved, the 65-inch television, the washer and dryer Brenda used daily, the dining room set, the coffee maker, the memory foam mattress I had bought Jessica and Mark as a wedding gift. When I totaled everything, it came to $62,750.48 worth of items, all with receipts bearing my name. The plan was simple and legal. If they wanted me gone, I would go, but I would take everything that belonged to me. I found a lovely one-bedroom apartment in a senior community 20 minutes away. I hired movers and scheduled removal for Saturday when the family would be at Leo's soccer game. Donna arrived that morning with her nephews, strong young men happy to earn money for what they assumed was routine furniture moving. Watching the movers work was surreal. The massive refrigerator was dollied out. The washer and dryer were disconnected and loaded. The dining room set was disassembled and packed. The television required special equipment to remove from its wall mount. The coffee maker, air purifier, smart thermostat, security system, all went into the truck. The final item was the memory foam mattress, which required careful handling but was undoubtedly mine according to the wedding receipt I had saved. Before leaving, I placed a printed invoice on the now bare kitchen counter. At the bottom, total value of recovered property, $62,750.48. Payment rendered in kind. Best wishes for your future endeavors. My new apartment felt like a sanctuary. Every item was there because I had chosen it. Morning light streamed through windows I could open as I pleased. The thermostat was set to my preferred temperature. The refrigerator contained food I enjoyed, prepared how I liked it. Later that afternoon, my phone rang insistently with Jessica's panicked voice, demanding to know how I could do this to family, how they would manage without basic appliances. Mark's message shifted between anger and legal threats, his voice growing agitated as he described the chaos I had left behind. I listened with detached interest. Their crisis was real, but no longer my responsibility to solve. For the first time in years, someone else's emergency was not automatically my problem to fix. When Jessica and Mark appeared at my door 3 days later, I watched through the security monitor without opening it. Jessica was crying desperately. Mark stood behind her, jaw tight with barely controlled anger. Through the intercom, I told them calmly that all items belonged to me, according to legal receipts. If they wished to dispute this, they could contact my attorney. I gave them 30 seconds to leave before calling security. Watching them walk away, I felt complete control over my own environment and decisions for the first time in years. The weeks brought attempts to draw me back into their drama. Jessica called crying about the empty house, how Gary and Brenda criticized everything, how the twins asked where Grandma had gone. Mark tried suggesting payment plans to sell back items, as if my decision had been purely financial rather than about respect and autonomy. Meanwhile, I was building something new. The senior community offered activities I hadn't realized existed. I joined a book club where my opinions were welcomed. I started watercolor classes, something I had always wanted to try. Most surprisingly, I made real friends based on mutual interest rather than obligation. 3 months later, Donna arrived with wine and news. Gary and Brenda had moved out after less than 2 months. unable to tolerate the discomfort of living without amenities they had grown accustomed to when I was subsidizing the household. Without my financial contributions and domestic labor, the house had become expensive and uncomfortable. When the heating bill arrived, Gary had exploded at the cost, forgetting he had upgraded everything when someone else paid the bills. More satisfying was learning that Jessica and Mark were managing independently. The twins had started helping with age-appropriate cooking and cleaning. Jessica was remembering skills she had possessed before marriage convinced her she needed constant assistance. 6 months later, Jessica called not to demand or complain, but to apologize. Her voice was different, quieter, and more thoughtful. She had been in counseling, trying to understand how she had lost herself so completely that she had been willing to sacrifice our relationship to avoid conflict with her husband. She didn't ask me to return or resume financial support. Instead, she asked if I would have lunch with her, just us, so she could begin rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms. She wanted to introduce me to the person she was becoming, someone who could make decisions without deferring to everyone else's preferences. I agreed to lunch, choosing a restaurant near my apartment and driving myself there. The woman who met me was recognizably my daughter, but she carried herself differently. She looked me in the eye when speaking, her voice steady. She apologized specifically for allowing me to be treated disrespectfully, acknowledging that regardless of financial contributions, I deserved basic consideration as her mother and as a person. She took responsibility without making excuses. Most importantly, she didn't ask for anything beyond the opportunity to slowly rebuild our relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation. She understood that trust required time and consistent behavior to repair. Over the following months, we developed a new kind of relationship. Jessica visited occasionally, always calling first and never overstaying. She brought pictures of the twins and updates about their activities, but didn't expect me to resume my role as free childcare or crisis management. The twins, when I finally saw them again, were delighted, but not traumatized. Children adapt better than adults often realize. They enjoyed visiting because it was a place where they had my complete attention without competing with household tasks or family drama. A year after my move, I overheard a conversation at my coffee shop. A woman my age described a heartbreakingly familiar situation. Her son and daughter-in-law had gradually taken over her resources while treating her as an inconvenience. She felt trapped. I turned around and gently introduced myself. Over an hour, I shared my story and resources, including the attorney who had helped me understand my rights. 3 months later, she sent a card from her own new apartment, thanking me for showing her it was possible to reclaim life and dignity. These days, I wake up in a space reflecting my preferences. I have lunch plans with friends who value my company rather than my contributions. I take art classes because I enjoy them, not because someone thinks I need a hobby. I manage my own finances and make my own decisions. Jessica and I have a relationship based on genuine affection rather than obligation. She has learned to solve her own problems, skills that had been dormant during years of relying on others. The twins visit regularly, but these are planned events we all look forward to, rather than taken for granted childcare. The hardest lesson was that love without respect is not actually love at all, but control disguised as affection. People who truly care about you want you to thrive, not sacrifice yourself for their comfort. Real family relationships can survive boundaries and honest communication. Toxic ones cannot. And that's useful information, rather than tragedy. When people ask if I have regrets, I honestly say I regret waiting so long. I wasted years trying to earn appreciation from people fundamentally incapable of providing it. Enabling that dynamic helped no one, least of all the people I thought I was protecting from consequences. The money I spent on lawyers and moving costs was the best investment I ever made, because it bought me back my life and self-respect. The temporary discomfort of establishing boundaries was nothing compared to the long-term damage of accepting mistreatment as the price of maintaining relationships that weren't serving anyone well. Today, I am planning a dinner party for friends I have made. Margaret is bringing apple pie, and David offered to help cook. Jessica will not be there. Not because we are estranged, but because this evening is about the community I have built, rather than family obligations that once consumed all my social energy. As I arrange flowers in a vase, I chose because I liked it rather than because it matched someone else's decor. I think about the woman I was 2 years ago, so focused on being needed that I had forgotten the importance of being valued. That woman would not recognize this life, centered on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than duty and sacrifice. The final invoice I left on Jessica's counter was not really about money or possessions. It was about accounting for what I had given and received, recognizing that the balance had become unsustainable. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling people to treat you poorly. Because as long as behavior has no consequences, there is no motivation to change. I am still someone who values family and enjoys being helpful, but I have learned to distinguish between being supportive and being exploited. The difference lies not in what you give, but in whether what you give is appreciated, reciprocated, and freely chosen, rather than expected and taken for granted. This evening, as I prepare to welcome friends into the home I created for myself, I feel complete contentment with my choices and confidence in my ability to handle whatever challenges the future might bring. I have learned that respect, once reclaimed, becomes renewable rather than something that can be gradually depleted by people who don't understand its value. The woman in the mirror looks the same as 2 years ago, but carries herself differently. Her shoulders are straighter, smile more genuine, eyes clearer. She has remembered something important, temporarily forgotten, in the chaos of managing everyone else's happiness. She has remembered that her own life has value too, and protecting that value is not selfish, but necessary for everyone's well-being. Required me to be the target for his insecurities and controlling behavior. He had been forced to develop his own coping strategies rather than relying on having a convenient scapegoat for his frustrations. The twins, when I finally saw them again, were delighted, but not traumatized by the changes in our family dynamic. Children, I realized, were more adaptable than adults often gave them credit for. They enjoyed visiting my apartment because it was a place where they could have my complete attention without competing with household tasks or family drama. Our time together was more intentional, and therefore more meaningful than it had been when I was a constant presence, managing everyone's daily needs. A year after my move, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop when I overheard a conversation at the next table. A woman about my age was describing to her friend a situation that sounded heartbreakingly familiar. Her son and daughter-in-law had gradually taken over her financial resources and living space while simultaneously treating her as an inconvenience. She felt trapped and didn't know how to change her circumstances without losing her relationship with her grandchildren. I found myself turning around and gently introducing myself. Over the course of an hour, I shared my story and the resources I had discovered, including Donna's insight about elder abuse and the legal rights of people who had made substantial contributions to household expenses. I gave her the name of the attorney who had helped me understand my options and the contact information for the senior community, where I had found not just housing but a social network of people dealing with similar transitions. 3 months later, she sent me a card from her own new apartment, thanking me for showing her that it was possible to reclaim her life and dignity, even when the situation seemed hopeless. She had discovered, as I had, that stepping away from dysfunction often created space for healthier relationships to develop, even with the same family members who had previously been part of the problem. These days, I wake up each morning in a space that reflects my preferences and priorities. I have lunch plans with friends who value my company rather than my contributions. I take art classes because I enjoy them, not because someone else thinks I need a hobby to keep me busy. I manage my own finances and make my own decisions about how to spend my time and energy. Jessica and I have developed a relationship based on genuine affection rather than obligation or guilt. She has learned to solve her own problems and make her own decisions, skills that had been dormant during the years when she relied on others to manage her life. Our conversations are more interesting because she has opinions and experiences that are genuinely her own rather than reflexive agreement with whoever seemed to have the most authority in any given situation. The twins visit regularly, but these visits are planned events that we all look forward to rather than taken for granted childcare that I was expected to provide, regardless of my own needs or schedules. They seem to enjoy having a grandmother who has her own life and interests, rather than one who existed solely to serve their immediate needs. Most surprisingly, I have begun to think about dating again. The senior community where I live has a healthy social scene, and I have met several interesting men who are also navigating the transition from family-focused life to personal autonomy. These potential relationships feel entirely different from the marriage I shared with Robert. Not because they are better or worse, but because I am a different person now. Someone who understands her own worth and won't compromise it for the sake of avoiding conflict. The hardest lesson I had to learn was that love without respect is not actually love at all, but a form of control disguised as affection. People who truly care about you want you to thrive and grow, not to sacrifice yourself for their comfort and convenience. Real family relationships can survive boundaries and honest communication. Toxic ones cannot. And that's actually useful information rather than a tragedy. When people ask me if I have any regrets about the choices I made, I tell them honestly that I regret waiting so long to make them. I wasted years of my life trying to earn appreciation from people who were fundamentally incapable of providing it. Not because they were evil, but because they had been allowed to build their comfort on someone else's diminishment. Enabling that dynamic helped no one, least of all the people I thought I was protecting from consequences. The money I spent on lawyers and moving costs and new furniture was the best investment I ever made, because it bought me back my life and my self-respect. The temporary discomfort of establishing boundaries was nothing compared to the long-term damage of accepting mistreatment as the price of maintaining relationships that weren't actually serving anyone well. Today, I am planning a small dinner party for some of the friends I have made over the past year and a half. Margaret is bringing her famous apple pie, and David has offered to help with the cooking. Jessica will not be there. Not because we are estranged, but because this evening is about the community I have built for myself, rather than the family obligations that once consumed all my social energy. As I arrange flowers in a vase that I chose because I liked it, rather than because it matched someone else's decor, I think about the woman I was 2 years ago, so focused on being needed that I had forgotten the importance of being valued. That woman would not recognize the life I have built, centered on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than duty and sacrifice. The final invoice I left on Jessica's kitchen counter was not really about money or possessions. It was about accounting for what I had given and what I had received in return, and recognizing that the balance had become unsustainable. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is to stop enabling them to treat you poorly, because as long as their behavior has no consequences, they have no motivation to change or grow. I am still the same person who values family and enjoys being helpful, but I have learned to distinguish between being supportive and being exploited. The difference lies not in what you give, but in whether what you give is appreciated, reciprocated, and freely chosen, rather than expected and taken for granted. This evening, as I prepare to welcome friends into the home I have created for myself, I feel something I had almost forgotten was possible: complete contentment with my own choices, and complete confidence in my ability to handle whatever challenges the future might bring. I have learned that respect, once reclaimed, becomes a renewable resource, rather than something that can be gradually depleted by people who don't understand its value. The woman in the mirror looks the same as she did 2 years ago, but she carries herself differently now. Her shoulders are straighter, her smile more genuine, her eyes clearer. She has remembered something important that she had temporarily forgotten in the chaos of trying to manage everyone else's happiness. She has remembered that her own life has value too, and that protecting that value is not selfish, but necessary for everyone's well-being. That realization, more than any material possession or family reconciliation, has been the true gift of this difficult but ultimately liberating journey.